Hi everybody, it's Dr. Elam here. In Unit 5, will be talking about poetry, and the slides that I'm using are from various classes, not just English 205. Occasionally I'll teach some of these poems in my early British literature classes, and so the slides have some technical terms and things that we won't be discussing for our class. Um, it's a lot of work to edit those slides, so I'm just going to leave them here. I will acknowledge when those technical matters come up, and then we'll focus on the poetry itself. So we are looking at the poems specifically. There's the Julius Caesar discussion in a separate video. And I'm going to be using a selective focus. So read each of the poems in their entireties. I'll highlight some matters that I think are particularly important. And then I will also highlight in places, and maybe even in some poems throughout the entire thing, a grammar-centered approach to understanding poetry. Now, I know that that might make your eyes glaze over, and I get it. Still, trust me on this. A grammar-centered approach can be very helpful, very grounding in understanding, especially early modern English poetry, which is what we're looking at for this unit. Our first poem is Before the Birth of One of Her Children by Anne Bradstreet. We have another poem by her right after this. And it's worthwhile reading poetry out loud. I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, and though I'm not forcing you, I can't be hovering over your shoulder and telling you to read this out loud. I'll read parts of these poems out loud, perhaps all of them, I don't know, parts for sure, and maybe give some help on pronunciation. So with early modern English poetry, this is poetry from what we would call the Renaissance, the 16th, 17th centuries, maybe even the 18th century could figure into this, so the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. There are words that look like they wouldn't rhyme or might be what is sometimes called near rhyme to modern ears that actually would be exact rhyme to early modern ears. Now, I'm not going to attempt to try and do a dialectal reading of these poems like Mark Twain, his dialect type of language in Huck Finn, or speak with an accent. But listen closely. All things within this fading world hath end. Adversity doth still our joys attend. No ties so strong, no friends so dear and sweet, but with death's parting blow are sure to meet. The sentence passed is most irrevocable, a common thing, yet oh, inevitable. How soon, my dear, death may my steps attend, how soon it may be thy lot to lose thy friend, we both are ignorant, yet love bids me these farewell lines to recommend to thee, that when the knots untied and made us one, I may seem thine, who in effect am none. All right, so now I actually made a little bit of a metrical error in line 9. You heard it probably where I emphasized the wrong syllables, but that's essentially how the poem would be heard. Poetic language is not a language that anybody speaks that I'm aware of. I mean, occasionally we rehearse poetry to each other, but poetic language is meant to be unfamiliar, not in order to alienate us from the poetry, but in order to resituate our perspective on the things that are being talked about. So here it's before the birth of one of her children. So I want to focus on these two lines here. No ties so strong, no friends so dear and sweet, but with death's parting blow are sure to meet. If we look at the verbs, this is the grammar part. Now I'm playing somewhat loose with subjects and verbs and predicates and objects, so indulge me. We're not going to get into the fine technical discussions, about all the various parts and types of verbs and so on and so forth. So again, I'll be speaking in general ways. So our verb are sure to meet. Something is sure to meet. And what is sure to meet? The ties are sure to meet. Friends are sure to meet. What are they sure to meet with? They are sure to meet with death's parting blow. Now, this is also presented in negative terms, and these are dear and sweet friends and strong ties, and they are presented in these negative. No ties, no friends are so strong or so dear, except that they meet with death's parting blow. So there is nothing in our connections. There's nothing in the strength of our connections or the depth of our bonds that actually prevents death's parting blow from coming. And Bradstreet isn't trying to be a pessimist here. She's not trying to beat us over the head with death and say, you know, stop smiling, you fool, and frown. Bradstreet is writing before the birth of one of her children at a time when infant mortality and the mother's mortality rates were very much higher than they are now. So the attendance of death on the birth of a child would be a real anxiety that people felt in the past. In fact, I don't want to make light of the fact that it's still an anxiety today. Perhaps our medical technology has made that anxiety less than it has been in the past, but it's still an attendant factor. All right, so there is nothing so dear that death's parting blow won't meet it. Now, who is she addressing in this poem? She's addressing my dear, and the dear has a lot, right? Thy lot belongs to the dear. And we have a to thee expression, and to whom this poem is addressed also has connection to the speaker. Now, there is a technical distinction between the speaker and the poet. So the poet is the individual with the pen and the paper who's writing things down in real time. And the speaker is the voice that you and I hear when we read a poem. Now, very often the speaker and the poet are, for all intents and purposes, interchangeable. There are occasions, however, where the speaker might say things that the poet doesn't believe, which is why we make the distinction. If you've ever read any poetry that has maybe a sarcastic aspect about it, it might be, not always, but it might be that the speaker is saying something that the poet, him or herself, isn't necessarily feeling or embracing as something true. So anyway, that's why we make the distinction. For most of the early modern poets, the speaker and the poet are really interchangeable, and definitely in the case of Bradstreet, the speaker and the poet are very close to one and the same. So if I use the term interchangeably, that's why. So Bradstreet is addressing her dear, and her dear is part of her. So this poem is not addressed to the child, it's addressed to the dear. And she says that we are ignorant, both of us are ignorant. What are we ignorant about? We are ignorant about how soon death may attend my steps. We are ignorant how soon it may be your lot, right? Your fortune or misfortune to lose your friend, me, to lose me. Love bids me, dear, love bids me to recommend these farewell lines. Now here there is an object, love bids something, and that object can be seen as its own grammatical unit where me becomes a kind of subject. So love bids me recommend these farewell lines to you. And what are these farewell lines? Why are they significant? When will they be significant? Well, they are significant because the speaker, Bradstreet, wants to seem part of the beloved who, when she's gone, when she is in effect nothing, I still want to seem like I'm yours. When the knot's untied, untied by death and death's parting blow. Death, in effect, making me nothing. So this is the motive, or at least the initial thought in Before the Birth of One of Her Children, Bradstreet addressing this to her husband. Now let's move on to the next lines. And if I see not half my days that's due when nature would, God grant to yours and you. The many faults that well you know I have, let be interred in my oblivious grave. If any worth or virtue were in me, let that live freshly in thy memory. And when thou feel'st no grief, as I no harms, yet love thy dead, who long lay in thine arms, and when thy loss shall be repaid with gains, look to my little babes, my dear remains. All right, so let's focus first on these two lines here, lines 13 and 14. God grant what nature would. So this is Bradstreet's wish. May God grant what nature would. What would nature grant? God would grant, may God grant what nature would grant, namely half the days that are due to me, to you, and to yours. So she is expressing, she's not making a mathematical expression or a scientific, biological, zoological expression, right? Like she's calculated how many years would be left to her, and then God could split that in half and distribute it among the survivors. She's not doing that kind of calculation. She is expressing the idea that if she dies, may God grant to her surviving husband and the children who are still there, and it may be that there are already children. I forgot how many children Bradstreet had, but she had multiple children, and this might be an occasion where there are already children living. It could also be that she anticipates the possibility that she would die while her child survives, but she wants to offer this well wish, and it is mediated through God. May God grant to you what nature would grant. And remember that God would be seen as nature's king, and nature would be God's lieutenant. So Bradstreet doesn't see a disconnection. She's kind of in that medieval tradition of seeing nature, fortune, like the seemingly random changes in the world and the universe as being all under God's governance. And, we won't get into those technicalities. That might be better for a theology class. But she wants these days granted to you, the beloved, her husband, and to yours, their children. And when. Now, we've got two when statements. When thou feelst no grief as I no harms, when that happens, love thy dead. You love thy dead. This is a direct address, the imperative mood. Love thy dead. Love me still when you feel no grief and I no harms. Though I'm dead, remember that I laid in your arms a long time. Right? This is companionship. This is not, sometimes if a reader might be hyper-focused on particular aspects of the marriage relationship, this line might seem weird, but Bradstreet, kind of as only in sexual terms, but Bradstreet is saying there is a companionship, a closeness between us. I lay in your arms a long time. Part of that closeness is expressed in having children. But she's saying, love me still, even after the grief is gone. And also when your loss is repaid with gains, and this seems to be the birth of children, when your loss is repaid with gains, look to my little babes. And who are the little babes? They are the remains of me. These are the ones who are a kind of representation of who I was in this world. Sometimes one of the psychologists here at the university, Dr. Jones, Eric Jones, has said to me, we often see ourselves as totally isolated and cut off from everybody around us. not socially, but like physically, because we live in our bodies and we can walk around and stuff, and we're not connected physically to our parents. We often forget that we are an extension of our parents, and I know for some people that has alarming implications. It's a reality. I'm not denying any of the difficulties that go with that. Bradstreet, of course, is thinking about this in very positive terms, that the babies, the children, are part of my remaining with you. So look to them. And now there's another possibility. A couple of years ago, I started thinking about this possibility. There is the possibility that Bradstreet is referring to her husband as my dear remains, look to my little babe. So that is another interesting way of reading it. It doesn't, it's not a contradictory way of reading it in terms of overall what the poetry is doing. It's just a possibility. I think it's interesting. I'm not sure, even though I recognize it. I'm not sure. I'm totally sold on it, but I wouldn't discount that possibility. And if thou love thyself, or lovest me, these protect from stepdame's injury. And if chance to thine eyes shall bring this verse, with some sad sighs honor my absent hearse, and kiss this paper for thy dear love's sake, who with salt tears this last farewell did take. And so we have these conditional statements. If you love yourself, if you loved me, then protect these children from the injury of a stepmother. We're not reading fairy stories for this. Well, actually, now that I said that, we actually are reading at least one explicitly connected to fairy story later on in the it's either in unit 6 or 7. There's a reason the wicked stepmother has become a kind of stereotype in folk literature, and part of that reason involves the step-parent displacing the children in order to get the children's inheritance. Now, it doesn't mean that all stepmothers are like this, but Bradstreet, living in a time where perhaps this was prevalent enough, at least prevalent enough to her mind, it prompts her to say, if you loved me, if you love yourself, if you love me, then protect the children from the potential injuries done by a step-parent. And if chance brings these verses, right, this poem, if chance brings this poem to your eyes, then honor my absent hearse, honor my absent, it could be her absent body, it could be the absent places in which she dwelt, honor them with some sad sighs. Now, I don't think that Bradstreet is telling her husband, I want you to be miserable for the rest of your life. I don't believe that at all. I think that she is concerned that her husband retains some memory of her. Now, I'm not saying that it's a totally, that feeling is totally free from anxiety. I think there is anxiety bound up with it. But I don't believe that Bradstreet is wishing for her husband perpetual despair. Kiss this paper. If you love me, protect. If these verses come to your eyes because I died, because I'm dead, honor my absence with some sad sighs, and then kiss this paper for my sake, for thy dear love's sake. And my sake, who was I? I was the one who did take this last farewell with salt tears. Thy dear love did this. And so Bradstreet is embedding in this final couplet here the situation of her composing it. Does it mean she literally was weeping while she wrote it? Not necessarily. It could be. It might be a possibility, but certainly her disposition was that of sorrow. Now, let's turn our attention to the next Bradstreet poem, Verses Upon the Burning of Our House. I believe it's the date is I think it's 1666, something like that, 1600s. All right, now the meter is shorter, the lines are a little shorter, so the poem really moves a little faster. In silent night, when rest I took, for sorrow near I did not look, I wakened was with thundering noise and piteous shriek of dreadful voice, the fearful sound of fire, and fire let no man know is my desire. All right, so I've accidentally forwarded the slide, but in any case, this is the situation of the house burning down, and she is saying in these first 6 lines, the first 4 lines are the waking up, right? I hear the cry of fire, and she says, let no one think that I desire them to hear the sound of fire and fire. I think this is a kind of a humane approach. Bradstreet, I believe, is, for whatever reason, I'm not sure what the reason is, I think that she is not only saying, I don't want to hear, my desire is never to hear the sound of fire, but I think that she also wants nobody to experience this fire. And perhaps the burning of her house gave her new perspective on the fears and anxieties felt by other people. Now, it is her house that's on fire, so ultimately that's the focus, but I believe that there is this extension of charity. My desire is that is to let no man know the fearful sound of fire and fire. So that's how I read lines 5 and 6. I started up, the light did spy, and to my God my heart did cry to straighten me in my distress, and not to leave me succorless. Then coming out, behold, a space, the flame consumed my dwelling place, and when I could no longer look, I blessed his grace that gave and took, that laid my goods now in the dust. So I've stopped this section in the middle of one of the rhymed couplets, so 15 and 16 would rhyme with each other, but this is kind of these are the sentences that I want to look at. So let's look at these 4 lines right here. I did spy the light. This is not a good light. This is a bad light. And my heart cried to God. And what was the cry? To straighten me in my distress. Don't leave me without comfort. So succor is comfort, help or aid. Usually it's comfort. So her first inclination is to cry out to God for comfort. Now, this isn't like some sort of self-pious, like, oh, celebrate me, I turn to God first. I think what Bradstreet is trying to emphasize is there's no other place for me to go. And this should not provoke disdain in us, like, oh, well, who else would you go to, sister? That's not a proper response to this poem. The proper response, I think, is to come alongside Bradstreet and to go through her experience with her vicariously. I mean, it's one of the beauties of poetry and literature generally is that we get a kind of experience. It's not primary experience, it's secondary, but it's still more than nothing, more than not having the experience. And I think also Bradstreet is being open. The cry to God is only because she is distressed and she needs comfort. So there's a bit of vulnerability in this cry. Yea, so it was, and so 'twas just. It was his own, it was not mine, far be it that I should repine, he might of all justly bereft, but yet sufficient for us left. So she is now starting to maybe process the loss and thinking of it in terms that we might connect with Job, right? The Lord gives, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Far be it from me that I should be in sorrow. He might take everything all from us justly, and nevertheless he left sufficiency for us. So this disposition is Bradstreet trying to find moments of positivity in the distress. Bradstreet is no fool. Bradstreet is not trying to cover up the negativity, nor is Bradstreet trying to cover up herself only with negativity, so that the reader rather only reads sorrow and terrible things. Bradstreet is doing both. Remember, now I don't think that Bradstreet is thinking about Virgil, but remember Virgil in the Eclogues presented to us both pessimism and optimism. He hid neither of them from the reader. And nevertheless, Virgil still had this optimistic streak that ran through his poetry. Bradstreet's doing something similar here. She is not afraid of the negativity of life, nor does she view the negativity as totally disconnecting her from positive things. She has this sense of hope. So, far be it that I should repine, that I should sorrow and be sad because of these things. He might be reft of all. He might take everything from us. He left sufficient to us. When by the ruins oft I passed, my sorrowing eyes aside did cast, and here and there the places spy where oft I sate and long did lie. Here stood that trunk, and there that chest, there lay that store I counted best. My pleasant things in ashes lie, and them behold no more shall I. Under the roof no guest shall sit, nor at thy table eat a bit. No pleasant talk shall e'er be told, nor things recounted done of old. No candle e'er shall shine in thee, no bridegroom's voice e'er heard shall be. In silence ever shalt thou lie. Adieu, adieu, all's vanity. So we have, and I'm saying e'er in 31 and 33. I should probably be saying ear, like here. Here be told, here shall shine. In any case, what is this section being viewed through? It's being viewed through sorrowing eyes, and the sorrowing eyes see all of this loss, ashes, no more, no guest, and not, no, and not, no, and not, silence, right? This is the reality of the burning of our house, and those realities are tied to things that were important, and she has to cry, Godspeed to all of them. God took them away. Everything is vanity. All of this is emptiness, a clutching at the wind. We don't have to get into the technical aspects of the term vanity as it's used in the English language or the Hebrew word that's used in Ecclesiastes. Bradstreet, of course, very familiar with the Bible, is presenting this loss in those terms of Solomon, right, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. She's saying everything is vanity. All of this is a wind. It blows away. It's here one day and it's gone. It's subject to vicissitude. Now after this, she writes, then strayed I 'gin my heart to chide, and did thy wealth on earth abide, didst fix thy hope on mouldering dust, the arm of flesh, didst make thy trust, raise up thy thoughts above the sky, that dunghill mists away may fly. Thou hast a house on high erect, framed by that mighty architect, which glory richly furnished, stands permanent, though this be fled. It's purchased and paid for too, by him who hath enough to do. A price so vast as is unknown, yet by his gift is made thine own. All right, so she begins to chide her heart, right? I am addressing my heart, and maybe I am, admonishing my heart, warning my heart in some way. And what is this admonition, right? This warning? Did the next three lines, the warning, right? Did you do these things? Did your wealth abide on earth? Did you fix your hope on moldering dust? Did you make thy trust the arm of flesh? These are the admonitions she's giving to her heart. Did you do all of these things? Now, we have a series of exhortations now. So the admonition is a warning, the exhortation builds up, right? Raise up thy thoughts above the sky, that dunghill mists away may fly, right? Raise your thoughts up, that the mists of the dunghill would go away. This is interesting that she's talking about this loss in terms of a dunghill. You have a house that's built on high. The mighty architect framed it. It is richly furnished. It's permanent, though these things have fled away, and is purchased and paid for by him who hath enough to do, which is kind of when you talk about people as having, I think we still have this expression, right? They can do for themselves, right? They have enough to do. I remember my dad using these terms and his family using these terms. So she's saying he has enough resources to do things with, and it's purchased by him. So this is a reference to God, who has built her permanent home for her, which will not go away. And she says that this price is unknown. And this is an allusion, I believe, to the death of Christ, which provides us, which furnishes us with a place to dwell with him, right? Christ paid the price for our sin. Christ said, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you might be also. And this is all done at God's expense. Not that God suffers loss in doing it, or that he does it grudgingly, but the idea of God doing for us emphasizes not necessarily that God has resources to burn, but emphasizes that we don't have the resources it takes to get near to him. He desires that for us and then does such work. So the price is unknown to us. It is made, thine own is made. The house is made by his gift, the house on high. And so Bradstreet focuses then on the gift of God in light of all of these terrible things, which she has not covered up. She expressed those in the last section. And from that perspective, seeing of reality, she turns her mind to another reality for comfort. And here are the final lines. There's wealth enough, I need no more. Farewell my pelf, farewell my store. The world no longer let me love, my hope and treasure lies above. Now she's using farewell again in a new way now. So farewell, the object is still the same, right? Farewell all of my possessions, the things that burnt in the house. And it's interesting that she talks about it as pelf. It's actually a shortened form of the word pilfer, or related to pilfering things, stolen things. And now she's looking at her possessions, not that she went around stealing them, but she looks at them perhaps in a way that, if it's pilferage, maybe it never belonged to me in the first place. And she does call it her store as well. So maybe it's a combination of things that really did have meaning and things that probably she didn't need. All of that got burnt in her house, but she's saying farewell to both. Let me love the world no longer. My treasure and hope is above. All right, let's turn our attention now to George Herbert, Easter Wings. This is a shaped poem from a work called The Temple, published in 1633, the year that Herbert died. And it was published posthumously. He sent the material to a friend of his, and he said, if you think it's worth publishing, go ahead and do it. Otherwise, burn it. His friend thankfully published the poems. Now, I want to show you what the poem would look like in a 1633 edition of The Temple. So this is, I forgot what library has this edition. It's, by the way, The Temple exists in multiple manuscripts, so you can find that a number of libraries have a copy of it in their collections. So this is what it looks like in the original manuscript, the original print booklet, and you would have to then flip it. You would turn it to the left, right? Rotate it 90 degrees to the left and read it that way. Now, I do not know, I'm going to be honest with you, I do not know if Herbert, because this was published after his death and he had no involvement in placement of these poems and the typesetting and so forth, the only thing that he would have had control over was the shaping of the poem, which his friend then oversaw in print. I don't know if Herbert intends for the poem on page 34, the left leaf, right, the left-hand side there, if he intends that to be read first and then 35 second, or if he had intended the poems to be read in such a way that if you took this book and you flipped it, then you would start at the top here, my tender age and sorrow did begin, and then you would go from the right-hand side of 35 all the way down to the left-hand side of 34. I don't know. I think it can be read either way without undermining the overall meaning of the poem, right? I don't think that it creates contradictory meaning or contrary meanings. It is, I think I teach this every fall in my early Brit Lit class, and we talk about, if you were an editor, how would you arrange these on the page? Would you keep this arrangement? Would you flip them? What would you do? And different editors choose different things for different reasons, and I think each editor, no matter their choices, really is interested in preserving what Herbert meant. In any case, I've rendered it onto the page in our PDF reader the way it appears in the manuscript, and I forgive me if that's annoying. I don't intend to irritate anybody, but that was my choice, not to irritate, but to render it as these two wings. So I'm going to render it this way, and then I'm actually going to go in this page by page order, rather than starting at the right-hand side of 35 and going down to 34. You're welcome to read it that way if you want. Now, in my early Brit Lit class, we talk about the rhyme schemes, which you can mark as A, B, etc., etc. I point out that there is this constant BC pattern that ties both of these pairs of wings. So we've got like two pairs of wings here, and their unity is achieved poetically by the BC rhymes, which occur in both. And so we would split it up into feet this way. I would put little lines in there. You don't need to worry about this for English 205. This is what I was talking about earlier in the slideshow, these technical matters. And then, I might mark the stressed syllables in my English 205 class. We would identify the meter in each of the lines, right? There's kind of this descent from pentameter down to monometer, and then ascent back up to pentameter, which actually mimics the motion of flying in a way. It doesn't, of course, speech cannot perfectly mimic motion, nor can like the physical printing of words, but in a way it can, right? There's a kind of flying motion that's achieved in here. So we don't want to, fall into the literalistic trap or the literalistic reduction where only literal meaning is, or where literal meaning is the only meaning available anytime ever. We need to understand that just as God has used metaphorical language in the scripture, we also are authorized by God to use metaphorical language. Indeed, it seems a feature of language that metaphor should play such a huge role, and God gave us language. Okay, so, and then I would just kind of, in a class, I would, reduce those words to numbers. Okay, so here is here are the subjects, verbs, and objects in Easter wings. I've marked subjects in green. I've marked verbs in red and objects in blue, and which I did previously with the Bradstreet poems. I didn't explicitly point that out. perhaps you discern that. And this grammatical approach, again, shows us the main ideas that Herbert is expressing in Easter wings. And in the first set of wings, as I've arranged it, right, so I've kind of flipped it this way, starting with Lord, who created man in wealth and store. We have Lord as the subject. Lord, let me rise. So this is imperative mood. It's direct address to God. Let me rise. Now, the first 7 lines, or 6 lines really, are an expansion on Lord related to man, and more specifically to the speaker, Herbert. Lord, who created man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor. With thee, O let me rise, as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight in me. Now, it's interesting to, I'll get back to the Lord part in just a moment here. It's interesting to see that in each of these wings, so there are 2 pairs of wings, right? We have the first pair on one page and the second pair on the other page. These wings are actually descending down to most poor in the top set here and most thin in the bottom set there. And so we descend to these bottom points where maybe sin is really apparent to the speaker, and it's only with thee in line 6 at the top and then line 16 at the bottom in the bottom set that the flying motion begins, right? So we have the descending motion, we could call it maybe the falling motion, and then the flying motion comes with thee. All right, Lord, you created man in wealth, right, in this ideal condition, and foolishly mankind lost that, and mankind decayed more and more till he became most poor. And the idea is that the fallen condition is the bottom. It is the furthest away from God that we can be, and we have no hope of getting out of this bottommost position. He says, Lord, let me rise. I want to rise as larks harmoniously and sing this day thy victory, then shall the fall further the flight in me. All right, so the fall furthering the flight in the speaker has to do with Lord, the Lord letting him rise, and larks harmoniously singing the Lord's victories this day is an allusion to the help of the Holy Spirit. So Herbert is not saying, his first intent is not, let me sing with the, the cloud of witnesses, the body of believers. He's singing, let me sing harmoniously with you. Let me rise with you and sing in harmony with your spirit. And this is Herbert alluding to or, expressing the idea that it is only in the Spirit's help that we have this rising motion. And then we see, and perhaps even my tender age, maybe that does work better at first. Let's move to that point. My tender age and sorrow did begin, and still with sicknesses and shame thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin. With thee let me combine and feel this day thy victory, for if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. All right, so here we see the sorrow of the beginning of the age of the speaker. So we have mankind created in wealth and store. However, the speaker begins his age in sorrow, in the most poor condition of man. My tender age began with that, in sorrow. And Lord, you punished the sin with sickness and shame, and I became most thin. Now, Herbert isn't complaining and saying, hey, I did nothing to deserve this. And I understand that is an understandable complaint, right? I get that. We're not going to answer that question in this class. Herbert, in his mind, looks at this as it's bad enough I am fallen into this sinful condition, but also the sickness and shame is a punishment for sin, and it has broken me down. Now, Herbert doesn't say I added my own sin to the general fall, the punishment of the general fall. However, I think it might be reasonable to believe he does embed that idea in here, and he becomes most thin. And so what he wants is he wants to combine, right? He says, Lord, let me combine and feel this day thy victory, right? Let me combine with you. And that again re-echoes the previous wings, right? Let me rise with you, let me combine with you and feel your victory. He says, if I imp my wing on thine. So imping, I had to look this up many years ago teaching this poem. So apparently, I'm not a falconer, I'm not into falconry, but apparently a practice in falconry is to imp a bird's wings with feathers to give it more lift. I think I'm getting that right. So Herbert is saying, I don't have the wing power to get up, right? I can't fly. There's no advancing flight in me. In fact, I need this imping, right? If I imp my wing on yours, if I put my little wing on your wing, then the affliction that comes from the tender of age, or the sorrow of living in this world, affliction then shall advance flight because I'm imped on your wing and I can have that rising motion again. Right, these are really, really dense ideas packed in a deceptively simple verse. The words themselves are not that complicated, but the ideas embodied in the words are very, very intricate and very, very profound. And so if we go back, if we go to the slide again of the book, we can encounter these new poems or these poems in a new way with our renewed understanding. My tender age and sorrow did begin, and still with sicknesses and shame thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin. With thee let me combine and feel this day thy victory, for if I imp my wing on thine, affliction shall advance the flight in me. Lord, who createdst man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more, till he became most poor. With thee, O let me rise as larks harmoniously, and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight in me. Right, so it takes on this richer meaning, which is part of why we should read poems more than once. I understand it's a class and we need to get through and all of that sort of thing. But the real value is brought in the repeated readings of literature. We know this is true from our readings of Scripture. We read Scripture over and over again, and people say, "Oh, I find something new every time." That is just it's a feature of literature. It's more important in the Scriptures, but it is a feature of literature that repeated readings reveal deeper meaning. So now let's turn our attention to Ben Jonson, inviting a friend to supper. This is in the tradition of Horace, in the satire that we read, where he contrasts country living with city living. Right? He doesn't like the urban life; he actually likes the rural life better. And Ben Jonson, who actually translated some of Horace's poetry, including Horace's The Poetic Art, Ars Poetica. Ben Jonson was very familiar with Horace and is probably drawing on that style in inviting a friend to supper. In fact, he even mentions Horace in the poem. All right, so let's take a look. Tonight, grave sir, both my poor house and I do equally desire your company, not that we think us worthy such a guest, but that your worth will dignify our feast with those that come, whose grace may make that seem something which else could hope for no esteem. It is the fair acceptance, sir, creates the entertainment perfect, not the case. All right, so again, this is a situation where maybe the old-timey spelling and the old-timey words can obscure meaning, um, and maybe some of these grammatical focuses will help us out. I want to focus on the highlighted portion here. This highlighted portion is saying, whose grace, your grace, good sir, your grace may make that seem something. Okay. Your company, your worth, that has the grace, and it's going to make something seem. It's going to make my poor house and I seem something. It's going to make my poor house and I, which could hope for no esteem, seem like it's something. The invitation is to you, your company. You are going to be the one who actually dignifies our feast. I'm not bringing all of the glory and good stuff. You're bringing it, and you are elevating this. It's really a delightful expression of friendship and the anticipation that friends bring when they come and attend to us. Yet shall you have to rectify your palate and olive capers, or some better salad ushering the mutton, with a short-legged hen, if we can get her, full of eggs, and then lemons and wine for sauce. To these a coney is not to be despaired of for our money, and though fowl now be scarce, yet there are clerks, the sky not falling, think we may have larks. I'll tell you of more and lie, so you will come, of partridge, pheasant, woodcock, of which some may yet be there, and godwit, if we can. Gnat, rail, and ruff, too. Now again, I've split this in at the rhyming point. But this collection of things that Jonson is listing. These are the things that he's hoping to entice his friend to come over for dinner. And it's interesting that he says, I'll lie to you, right? I'll tell you more, I'll lie so that you will come. Now, maybe an overly scrupulous reading might be like, why is this guy lying to his friend? But the irony is that Jonson, the speaker, is saying, I'm going to lie to you. So this is open now. It's out in the open. And the lie becomes unimportant. And what becomes important is, I will go through great lengths to get your company here. Not because I disdain you, but because I value you. And we had that established in the first 8 lines. So he doesn't say, like your stupidity is coming to my house. He says that you're going to dignify my feast, and I value it so much. Let me just list all the things that I'm going to serve, and maybe I'm serving them, or maybe I'm not. But the point is, come to my house. I'll do my best to provide for you. Howsoe'er my man shall read a piece of Virgil, Tacitus, Livy, or of some better book to us, of which we'll speak our minds amidst our meat, and I'll profess no verses to repeat, to this if aught appear which I know not of, that will the pastry, not my paper, show of. Now I know that seems like, what is he even talking about here? We recognize the name Virgil. Horace, I believe, is mentioned later. But we have mentioned Virgil. We read his eclogues. Probably Jonson is thinking about eclogues, or maybe even Georgics in this poem, which are 2 kind of rurally focused works by Virgil. Tacitus, Livy, these are Roman authors that Ben Jonson had read and translated some of their works. I told you he translated Horace. He's saying, my man shall read those works. And then he says this, if aught appear. Now what does this mean? The pastry will show of verses. So my man, the servant, I don't know, the butler, I guess, whoever waits the tables, that person will read Virgil and Tacitus, and none of my own poetry is going to be here. It's kind of a self-deprecating, funny moment, right? Don't worry, I won't read my poetry to you when you come over. The pastry will show my verses, not my paper. And the idea there is when you cook a pie, you need to, in some recipes, and I think this occurs even now, maybe some of you are familiar with, raised pie recipes or meat pie recipes. Sometimes you'll line a pan with paper, and if you use newsprint, which I don't recommend, but if you used it, the ink might bleed onto the crust. And Jonson, it's really clever what he's doing here. He's saying, not only will I not read my poetry, but I'll line the pie pan with it. And that's the only way my verses will appear. The pastry will show of the poetry. Not me. I'm not going to be the one who reads it to you. So come on over. I won't burden you with my own verses. It won't be my paper. Digested cheese and fruit there sure will be, but that which most doth take my muse and me is a pure cup of rich canary wine, which is the mermaid's now, but shall be mine, of which had Horace or Anacreon tasted, their lives as do their lines, till now had lasted. Tobacco, nectar, or the Thespian spring are all but Luther's beer, to this I sing. And this is an interesting sequence right here. So Jonson is saying, I'm going to skip over the part about the digested cheese, line 27, which probably, maybe belongs in the previous section. It kind of is an outlier. But Jonson is saying the Canary wine, that's the thing, wine from the Canary Islands, which probably had a particularly positive quality to it. Whether or not each of us drinks wine or advocates for drinking wine, for Ben Jonson and in his cultural setting, drinking wine would be associated with, dinner with a guest. He says, and this is a funny little moment also, it belongs to the Mermaid right now, the Mermaid Tavern, where, many poets are said to have gone. I don't know personally if they had been there or whatever, but the Mermaid Tavern. In fact, our syllabus has an artist's portrayal of famous poets at the Mermaid. He says, this Canary wine made in Canary Islands, is very fine wine. It belongs to the Mermaid now, but it shall be mine. So this kind of goes into the I'll lie and get you here. This is the best stuff. If Horace or Anacreon had tasted it, not only would their poetry last, but their lives themselves would have lasted. They would be here. Now, Jonson knows, he's no dummy, he knows that's not true. He's using hyperbole, he's using overstatement to draw his friend, and he contrasts this wine with other things that could be associated with pleasure, right? Tobacco. The wine is better than tobacco. The wine is better than nectar. The wine is better than the Thespian spring. The wine is better than the spring that is the source of poetry. All of this stuff is Luther's beer. Now, with apologies to my Lutheran colleagues and those of you who might be Lutheran, Jonson, he's not taking a dig at I don't think anyway, he's taking a dig at Luther here. He is just saying that this wine is so good. He may even be elevating it not to sacramental status, but he is making a big deal about this drink that is associated with holy things, it's associated with virtuous things, and that will become even more apparent in the next few lines. So Luther may have drunk beer, y'all may like your tobacco, right, smoking your pipes or whatever the case may be, your nectar, y'all may like your poetry, but I'm going to have wine from the Mermaid made in the Canary Islands. All of the other stuff is nothing. Of the wine, of this we will sup free, but moderately, and we will have no pulley or parrot by, nor shall our cups make any guilty men. But at our parting we will be as when we innocently met. No simple word that shall be uttered at our mirthful board shall make us sad next morning, or affright the liberty that we'll enjoy tonight. So here, Jonson is pointing out that we will have this wine freely. Nobody is going to count our cups and make us pay for what we've had. but our freedom will be used in moderation. And he says, we won't have a pulley or parrot by, right? Nobody's going to be there just kind of like talking with empty words and, just saying nonsense, repeating our own ideas back to us. This, I think, really does connect well with Horace's satire, where he talks about his retirement back to his country home in the evening, right after his day in the city, being characterized by his old neighbor telling moral tales. And Jonson is, again, drawing on that idea. He may not have that particular satire in mind, but the idea of friendship lending itself to not just delight, but also to moral uplifting is embodied in this poem. And he says, we're going to drink this wine moderately. No tobacco, no beer, none of that other stuff. And at our parting, we'll be as innocent as when we met each other, right? Nobody's going away from here drunk, falling down, can't find their way home. And not only that, but there won't be any words, no simple, mindless, unthinking words at our mirthful board that will make us sad the next morning. And he could mean sad in the sense of like anxious or regretful. He could also mean like overly serious, that we're depressed the next morning. And he also says that no simple word will affright the liberty that we'll enjoy tonight. So there is a presentation to the audience, to the reader, and he probably has somebody in mind. I don't know who that would have been. So scholars do speculate on who that might have been. For our purposes, the idea is this person is going to experience joy and fellowship, and the speaker is not going to burden him with his poetry. He's going to give him the best wine instead of tobacco or nectar or whatever. And they are going to enjoy themselves in a way that is morally uplifting. It's one of the most delightful poems that I teach. Maybe it doesn't have the same gravity that some of the Greek material had, like Sophocles' Oedipus or even matters in the Iliad, but it's still worthwhile poetry that expresses robust ideas about things that matter to the human condition. In this case, it's fellowship. All right, so I guess I've forgotten to highlight the we, right? This is emphasizing fellowship. We will sup, we will have, and we will be. I mentioned the pulley or parrot, right? No empty words. We're going to be free, and at our parting, we will be innocent, like when we started. And this will characterize our meeting together. Okay, let me go through this here. I probably should have done my little switcheroos. And we will now shift our attention to Robert Herrick. So we have 3 selections by Robert Herrick for this class. The first one is Delight in Disorder. Now, some people look at the titles of Robert Herrick's poetry, and oftentimes the poetry that is anthologized in places like the Norton Reader are very secular. They emphasize, very, very tactile things that are material and so on and so forth. And people, it's glossed over that Robert Herrick was he was a Christian man. He even wrote some powerful Christian poetry. He was also a man like Ben Jonson who appreciated maybe the simple things in life. And even the simple things in life are worthy to have poetry written about it. Remember at the beginning of the Eclogues, if you don't, just nod your head with me. The beginning of the Eclogues, we have, or in the Eclogues rather, we have this idea of, war isn't the only thing that deserves its poetic muse. rustic things. The forest deserves a muse. And Robert Herrick here seems to think that clothing deserves a muse. And delight in disorders about clothing. So let's read this. A sweet disorder in the dress kindles and clothes a wantonness, a lawn about the shoulders thrown into a fine distraction, an erring lace which here and there enthralls the crimson stomacher, a cuff neglectful, and thereby ribbons to flow confusedly, a winning wave, deserving note in the tempestuous petticoat, a careless shoestring in whose tie I see a wild civility, do more bewitch me than when art is too precise in every part. All right, so, and you notice some interesting pronunciations in my reading, and that's because words like distraction could be pronounced in Herrick's time as distraction, and Herrick isn't the only poet to use that kind of word with the expanded syllables. So that is, I'm not butchering the poem. It's actually meant to be that way. Throne and distraction are supposed to rhyme. In any case, let's look at the details here. A sweet disorder kindles a wantonness, a playfulness, it's not wanton in the sense of dissipation and, appetitive. I'm trying to think of another word, like vicefulness. We have words for those. Herrick is saying there's playfulness, disorder, that's kindled by this sweet disorder in the dress. And that sweet disorder, not only does it kindle, but it bewitches. It bewitches me. And it bewitches me more than when art is too precise in every part. When everything is too precise, perhaps that can bewitch me. But what really bewitches me are these other things, the lawn thrown about the shoulders like a shawl, or I'm trying to think of a modern word. I can't think of a modern word other than shawl, thrown about the shoulders, an erring lace on the stomacher. Again, I don't know what kind of clothing that is. Occasionally my students tell me, I nod my head and then I forget. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. A neglectful cuff, the ribbons confusedly flowing, a wave in the petticoat. Those are the things. The shoestring that's careless, is it untied? Is it tied in an uneven way? He's saying, in whose tie I see a wild civility. Those are the things that draw me. And Herrick is expressing something, I think, that is familiar to many. He is not saying that attention to detail and perfection is immoral, right? I think he is not saying that at all. What he is saying is, it's in the imperfections, the places where things may go slightly wrong. In those places, we can find a drawing, a kindling. In fact, Herrick is, rather than displacing order, he is actually adding to order the tempestuous, all of these tempestuous things, as things that can delight us, things that can make us playful. Now, different readers of this can then extrapolate from that and say, oh, inevitably it will lead us into, bad behavior or something like that. Herrick doesn't go there. It's the reader who would go there. Herrick, on the other hand, is just focusing on the reality that imperfection can sometimes be a draw. And again, he goes through all of these things. The lawn, the erring lace, the neglectful cuff, the ribbons, the winning wave, the careless shoestring. Those are the things that bewitch him more than when art is too precise in every part. All right. The next poem is a pair of tercets, 6 lines, called Upon Julia's Clothes. And so this is another poem that is about clothing. And in this particular instance, the clothing is on the beloved, Julia. And Herrick writes this. The speaker says, when as in silks my Julia goes, Then methinks how sweetly flows that liquefaction of her clothes. Next, when I cast mine eyes and see that brave vibration each way free, oh how that glittering taketh me. All right, so Herrick here is emphasizing, right? Methinks, it seems to me. Methinks doesn't mean I think, it means it seems to me, technically. All right, it seems to me that the liquefaction flows. The liquefaction flows of her clothing. How sweetly it flows when Julia goes in silks. That is, it is drawing Herrick. It's drawing the speaker. Again, the person who reduces these things merely to a fetish, they might be, disordered. Uh, they might view this in a disordered way. But we also know that there are ordered ways, fitting ways of regarding the situation of clothing as an attractive thing. And it doesn't have to be, again, romantic attraction. It could just be attraction of an object that looks beautiful, right? The liquefaction of her clothes, how sweetly it flows when Julia goes and sings. That glittering taketh me, right? It arrests me. It stops me. It stops me when I cast mine eye and see that brave vibration each way free. This is Herrick delighting in the small things of life. And there are moments where I believe appropriately we are captured by it. And I think it is right to appreciate those moments. And we can even take the additional devotional step of thanking the Lord for such delights, right? He's not obligated to delight us, and yet he allows it to happen for us. And we should be grateful to him for it. All right, and we switch now to the virgins to make much of time, which some of you are perhaps familiar with. We get more of a maybe a moral focus. It's still not, it's not a religious poem or anything like that. But it is something about behavior and dispositions of mind. So here's to the virgins to make much of time. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best, which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent, the worse, and worst times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go merry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. So here, Herrick is saying, let's focus on this. I'm sorry, I skipped over it. This first stanza of 4 lines. He's saying, gather the rosebuds while you're able to do it. Time moves on. It's not going to slow down for you. In fact, the rosebud, it's only available today. Tomorrow it's dead. And then he turns his attention to the marker of time that is most familiar to us, the sun. The higher that glorious lamp gets, the sooner his race will be done. And this isn't talking about the 24-hour period of the day, but this is talking about the metaphorical day, which represents life. As the sun gets higher and higher and waxes, you realize it is on its way to the end. He's near to setting. The first age is the best age, according to Herrick. Youth and blood are warmer in this age. I can tell you, so I'm not an old man yet. I don't think I'm an old man yet. I'm in my early 50s. And I can tell you that my experience of life in my early 50s is quite different from what it was in my early 20s, even my 30s. And I can say that, yes, youth and blood are warmer in that first age. And that first age, when it's spent, the worse and worse times still succeed the former. What is the former? That that former age. Now, Herrick, I don't think is trying to be a jerk here. He's not, like wagging his finger like the grumpy old man saying, y'all don't know how good you have it, you're going to be dead soon. He's not doing that. He's trying to exhort, maybe admonish a little bit, his readers to take advantage of the time of life when it has this kind of energy, when it has this kind of vigor. Use it to its fullest. And he's got a specific end in mind, which we'll get to in the last stanza, right? The former time being the best age. He says, don't be coy, right? Don't act like you're shy. Don't purposefully withdraw yourself. Don't be coy. Use your time, that first time. Go marry. And this has to do with getting married. Now, some could read, if you check the OED, it might, you could find the possibility that means like go out and, have fun. But Herrick really is saying, go get married. Use your time. Having once lost your prime, the best age, the first age, when youth and blood are warmer, when you've lost that, you may tarry forever. Right? You may not get married ever. Now, Herrick is not presenting a utilitarian argument for marriage here, like, oh, get married because that's, you'll find legal safety and economic safety and all of those things. I mean, probably he isn't denying those realities. He's just saying that in youth, we have the energy to make the most of our youthfulness, and while we have this time, we can find the rosebuds, right? We can gather the rosebuds. Time's flying. That flower today, that rosebud today that we could be gathering, tomorrow it's dying. Get it. Go marry. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the analysis of the poetry. I know it's a longer video than usual. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you again next time.